Okay, welcome back. It is definitely about time we finished off this project and shipped it to production, so to speak. So we will be zeroing in on these two final stories. This is really the last two things that are missing in our project. So let's dive right in. The first user story we'll look at, I can see a different icon or background image, example snowy mountain, hot desert, depending on the weather. So if you remembered, we had if we look at our weather object here, there was a property I had noticed before I even actually looked at that story, honest to God, and that was an icon right here. So this string implies something meaningful, and this is a good thing to do, by the way, is to really think like a detective, and when you see a different property, assume that it's there for a reason. All these things have meaning to it, otherwise they wouldn't be here. We're not necessarily using all of them, but they could serve some purpose if we wanted to. And since I saw this icon here, it clicked in my mind that this string is probably going to represent some sort of icon. So how do we figure out what to do with this? Because this is not any type of thing I can invoke in a function by itself. I can't just invoke show icon 09n. JavaScript does not have that natively. This comes in the weather API, of course, just like everything else from a different programming interface. So let's poke around a bit. Down here, there's a little more documentation, and if we click on current weather data, we need to find the icon. I usually will do command find or command F or control F if you're on a PC, and look for, you can see my last search result, look for icons, see if we can find something here. We get the icon, of course, back in the examples, but how do we use, look at this. So I just see this here, list of weather condition codes with icons, range, thunderstorm, drizzle. This looks correct. Let's try clicking on this. So this looks promising. We have some good weather icons here. This is definitely what we need. I've never seen red lightning before, but I imagine that'd be kind of cool to see. Actually, everything's kind of red, at least on my computer, the way my colors are rendering it. So the URL is just linked to, the icons are linked to a URL, and we have this icon here. You can see it says, here's the string. It looks very familiar to what we have here, right? So here's the string, and then we see this string used in this URL. So I think it's safe to assume that this code right here lines up with the code of the object that we get, and any call to a respective code will give back the appropriate icon. So let's try dropping that in our application. Since we are linking to an image technically, we are going to need to use an image tag, and it will be a little more difficult to use the image tag in the same way we used the other tags, which was, we just made an ID and then we set the HTML of each thing. We're not setting the HTML of the image tag, we're setting an attribute on it. There's a way you can do that in jQuery, but we are just going to instead practice creating a whole new element and appending it onto an element. So if we had, let me use the icon I have. The icon I have is 10n. So let's say we have, an element, and I'll just hard code it in here right now. I want to hard code this right into here, right? So if we had image src equals, paste that is the wrong URL, that's my code pen. Let's copy this here. Okay, I'll just use what's in there just to keep things kind of quick. So if I had this in here and reran it, we would see the icon appear. And I could also put this image tag inside here, though it might get overwritten by the jQuery HTML. I actually don't know that offhand. I'd be interested to see what happens though. It looks like, yeah, it gets overridden. So what can we do to kind of line this up? Well, we can use jQuery to create this element and insert it along this current temp thing. That would be called prepending an element. If we had this container for an example, and we appended another div to it, we would essentially, if I can line it up correctly, appending something, this is good terminology by the way, appending something basically does this. It appends a div tag, for example, as the last child of whatever parent it's targeting. In this case, and I'm in theory targeting the container. If we prepend it, we make it the first child, so it'd be up here, something like that. I want to do this inside here. I want to make the first thing, once it's loaded, the icon. So let's see how we can do that in our JavaScript. So here we have again, give you a minute to kind of take a look at the code, see where I am. Here are the things that are changing stuff. And this add class was something I was experimenting with, by the way. We do not need this actually. And if you're following along from the last one, it wasn't actually there. Apologies that this is slightly different than where we picked off, because I was kind of looking at things ahead of time. So hopefully it's not too confusing. So if we wanted to append or prepend an image tag, we could do something like this. We can select current temp, and then we can prepend. And the jQuery prepend method is very cool. You can put in a string of the HTML that you want. So this will actually prepend its own div element. If we save it and run it, we would not see that because being overridden by the HTML. We need to put that underneath here. Because this HTML thing, right, it will, if it's setting the HTML inside a certain element, it will wipe out any of the children within that element. And we were basically setting a child in here and then wiping it out with this HTML method. So let's try this again. Did that run? And of course I need to select it correctly. I was selecting a tag that was current temp, not the ID of current temp. Okay, one more time. Here we go. That took a little bit of time, but this is prepended. Now if we can do the same thing with our image tag, right? We can do image src equals. The only funny thing here is, since we have single quotes here, we need to put double quotes in here. We're putting basically a string within a string. So let me copy this one more time. And if we paste it, run this again, we get the icon. So now we need to get the correct icon. The trouble with this string within a string is we can't really put variables inside here. It's not that intelligent in parsing which parts of the string is a string within a string and which parts of a string is like a string of a variable. So instead, let's declare, we'll declare a local variable right above it, and I will call it icon src. And we're going to set this to the icon that we get. Once again, our icon is within this object, which is within the weather array, this thing right here. So I'm just going to declare the icon up here just to kind of separate our concerns. This could really all be in one variable. I'm taking an extra step just kind of for a little bit of better readability. Weather 0, and we will dot icon off of that. So then our icon source, src, is going to be, this is the stuff that's not changing until we get to here. This part, this icon will of course change. So I will cut from there, and then we will add the dynamic icon in there, and then finish it off with the .png. So here we got image source, and now we can separate the literal string and add icon source. Now there is plus the end of that, and we add that there. There is something wrong with this tag right now. I'm going to see if you can find it. Think about what this would render. Let's try running it. So it actually looks like it worked pretty well, but I want to inspect it because that kind of drew a red flag for me. I'll tell you why in a second. It looks like it has, so jQuery is a little smarter than I thought. It has implicitly added these double quotes. You can see right here that there's 2 double quotes, right? And that's all obviously surrounding the attribute for src. But I didn't actually put double quotes around here. But it knows to add those double quotes. I'm actually very impressed by that. If I add the double quotes myself, though, I want to see what would happen. We get the same exact thing. So this will work without surrounding it in quotes, in its own quotes, or not. But since this single quote represents what this is right here, I want to add these double quotes because that's, to me, that's a little more explicit, and I think that's a little better practice. I recommend you do the same. It also helps you kind of keep track of and think proactively about which quote is making a string and which quote is like part of the string that gets interpreted. You know, it's a little confusing, so it's good to kind of keep that at the forefront of your mind. All right, so we have the icon all set, so that's great. Looking pretty good. Let's check that off. All right, finally, we want to push a button to toggle between Fahrenheit and Celsius. This is a little more tricky because the danger here is that we can start to get, you know, very hacky. What I mean by that is we can get into some bad practice. Right now, our code is very nice and clean, and I don't want to like make this into a monster, so to speak. There's some ways to toggle it where you just kind of like throw in a bunch of conditionals, re-render things, like repeat yourself by re-rendering things. I don't really want to repeat any of this stuff. This function works pretty well, so I want to do as little as I can to be able to toggle it back and forth. And I also don't want to make another call to this open weather map thing. I know we can change this unit to get the Celsius version, but if we change the unit and make the call again, we have to do that waiting again till we get the weather back. It's much easier just to get the correct unit. That didn't make too much sense. It's much easier to have both Fahrenheit and Celsius at hand so we can quickly separate them out. So how can we do that? Well, remember, we don't really need to get this weather twice. We can just convert it ourselves because there's a pretty simple mathematical formula to do that. So we want to start out by preparing for our toggling. So I'm going to make a switch. I'm going to declare it globally. And it's just var Celsius or cell equals false. So this is the thing that will be switched on and off depending on if we are displaying it in Celsius or not. And since I'm going to be using the same data again, I'm going to globally declare the weather data as well. And then we will add it. in here, I'm going to change this to API data. And then I will set the global weather data now to API data. So that just kind of puts it on the global scope so that we can access this variable no matter what function we are in. So now that we have that, we want to basically tweak this stuff so that we can display either Celsius or Fahrenheit, and then also have a toggle. By the way, I added a toggle link myself. I just made a very simple anchor tag in here. I've set an anchor tag. If I set it to pound, that's basically a blank link because we're not actually linking to somewhere, we're using it as a toggle. So I put an ID toggle on it so we can target it with jQuery later on. So that's all I did behind the scenes. So now that we have this, the only thing again that we're changing are these degrees here, and we're going to specify if they are Fahrenheit or Celsius. So this is in terms of a bit of a design pattern. This is the view, right? We're changing a piece of the view. So I want to make a function that just gets invoked, and whether or not the Celsius variable is true or false, it's going to display the right temperature for us. That way when we change it, we can just kind of re-render using that helper function again. So the function is going to be, I'll declare it up here, and it'll be called display temp. And it's going to take a number. That's going to be what we will return as the full-fledged temperature, and whether or not we want it in Celsius. So if it is in Celsius, if C, because we're using this parameter that we'll pass in, then we're just going to return and the formula is something like num temperature minus 32 times 5/9. And then I'm also going to add the unit there. And since I'm just returning, this will short circuit anything under here. So if I get below this line, I know that it's not Celsius. So then we can just simply return the num, because we are assuming a Fahrenheit temperature. I'll actually say, just to be more formal, F temp or Fahrenheit temperature. And then we're going to do this. Let me save that. And now in here, I want these to use that helper function, right? So wherever we're doing a temperature, the current temp, we want to pass this through that function. So the function name was, again, it was display temp. So this is now modifying our values. We're passing this value through here. And also I'll pass in the global Celsius, which starts off as false. So we're passing this through here before we are assigning it to current temp to get a more formatted result that we will display. And again, for high and low, we want to do the same thing. All right, those are the three places we're using that. Let's give it a save, give it a run, see where we are. Looks to be taking some time. I wonder if I closed everything correctly. Are we getting an error here? Num is not defined. Right, because I changed that formal parameter. So I gotta make sure I change them elsewhere. Simple mistake that can always trip you up. All right. So let's run this again. All right, we're back in business. And now we have the temperature displayed. Now I want to do one more thing to this. Just like the same way we passed this through this function before we give back the result, I want to pass this result through a math function to make it a little nicer. And that's going to be, of course, math.round. So if I wrap this whole thing, this will just round it to the nearest whole number. Now be careful not to wrap the entire thing in a math.round. What do you think will happen if we did this? I'll give you some time to think, like a second. Okay. If we do that and we run it, we get back the same thing. That was weird. Can we run that back again? Oh, because I'm doing this in the Celsius, and we are not in Celsius yet. But I can do the same thing here. So again, what do you think would happen if we did this? It's actually easier to see it in the Fahrenheit. We get this funny thing, not a number. Since we are adding a number to a string here, we are already concatenating and converting this into a string. So now we're trying to tell JavaScript to round a string, and that's just not a number by definition. So do make sure that you're only rounding the actual number and not the string that we are concatenating. That way, the number gets rounded first and then converted into a string. Let's save it, run it again, and now it's looking much nicer. So now all that's really left to do is add the actual toggle. So how can we do that? Well, there's something that we have to think about, because we actually want to re-render these here. We just don't want this call. So this function, everything we have going on here, is going to be something that needs to happen over and over again. So I'm going to refactor this into another helper function. This is going to be a function for actually rendering the data. All we really need, I think it's safe to get rid of that console.log, so I'll clean that up a bit. And then we are going to select all of this. We're going to cut it. And we are going to make another function up here. I'll just call it render. If you know a little bit about React, that might seem familiar to you. And what do we need to pass into this? I'm going to paste it first and then see. We want weather data. So I'm going to make this a parameter so that this weather data is shadowed by this parameter. It won't necessarily be this global one up here, though I am going to pass this into it. And that's just so if we had a more complicated thing, maybe we're getting weather data from somewhere else, we can pass in like a different one and use this in other ways and not be too dependent in a more strict way on this global variable here. And likewise, I'm also going to add whether this will be in Celsius or not. So now this is what's the stuff that's being run. This is like the things that are set up. This is kind of the lower level, if you will. And this is the higher level. This is the result of using all those other functions. So inside this JSON, we've assigned the API data to our weather data global. And now we can just invoke render API data and pass in our global cell, up there. And so this should give the same exact result as what we had before. We didn't actually change any logic, we just kind of moved things around. So instead of writing the function that's being used inside this callback, we're abstracting most of it away, and then we're just saying use this now. So finally, after this, we want to add an event listener like we did with the random quote machine. We want to add that onto this link here. It has an ID of toggle, so I can select it with jQuery. And on click, we want to do a few things. We want to toggle this cell variable. So to toggle a Boolean, it's usually understood that we just do this. We negate the Boolean, then reassign its opposite value to its variable. So this always just flips it on and off, changes it from Celsius to Fahrenheit. After that, we are going to call render again. And we are going to pass our data and the cell variable. This data should not have changed, but this should have. And we will see that when we render it again, it will rerun all this logic up here, all these display temps, passing it along down to here and triggering this branch instead, reassigning it, and then re-rendering all this stuff. So if we save it and run it and click toggle, we can see that it very nicely and very quickly goes back and forth. This is the entire project. Let me know if there are further pressing questions for all your weather needs. There's definitely more you can do with this. It's a pretty basic example all in all, very light on the design. I encourage, as kind of an extra credit, to change this background here to be the URL of the, or be a URL of the weather. So like make it rain, make it rain behind here for a background, or make it like a big image of the sun. It would involve finding those images and then linking it to the background of the body tag. So if you're curious about doing that, see if you can give it a go. And as always, thank you for watching.